Драги гледачи и гледачки, ме радува што го гледате ова ново видео на издавачката куќа Артконект на нашиот YouTube канал. Јас сум Катерина Шекутковска, денес ќе разговарам со шведската авторка и илустраторка Сара Лундберг. Ќе разговараме за нејзината книга Птицата во мене, лета, каде, посака. Книга која нашата издавачка куќа ја издаде во рамките на проектот Европски приказни на надеж. Проект кој беше поддржан, односно е поддржан од Европската унија преку програмата Креативна Европа. Hello, dear Sarah, and thank you very much for taking time for this short talk today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So I can see a lot of stuff in the background. Maybe you can tell me where you are.
I am in my studio, actually. So behind me is my little, where I have my books and some paint and stuff like that. But I also do sculpture, so I have a lot of stuff to work on wood with. And I just turn around here so you can see I have quite a big studio. It's very messy, I'm sorry, but I am on the floor. There are some wooden sculptures that I'm going to have an exhibit later on in the spring next year. So this is my studio. I've been here for 17 years, actually.
Great. It looks very, very good. Yeah. Creative atmosphere, of course. Yeah. So yeah. Sarah, as I said at the beginning, we're not going to talk about your sculptures today, maybe next time. But today we're going to talk about, your book, The Bird Within Me.
Ако се свијам целосно, личам на птица што спие. Како таа што ја направив од сина глина. Таа што ќе ја дадам на мама. Всушност да бев птица, ќе можев да одлетам. Далеко од селото, до нешто поинакво, до некое место каде што ќе можам да бидам каква што сум.
So the book is based on the life of a Swedish artist, Berta Hansson. So maybe at the beginning you can tell me something about how did you come across this artist? When did you hear the first time about her? And what motivated you to write and illustrate a book about her life?
Yes, me and my publisher, Jenny Franke, her name is Jenny Franke, we had been talking about making a book about, because both of us are from the north of Sweden, and we discussed creating a story that was from that area, because it has special nature. So we were into making a story about nature, and as we were discussing different subject matters, my publisher went to a studio to an exhibit with Berta Hansson's paintings, and Berta Hansson was from the north of Sweden, born in the north of Sweden, and she said to me, what about making something that's based on the story of Berta Hansson? And I didn't know much about Berta Hansson when she suggested this. So I read everything that is, there are some books, there's a biography about her, and she has written some of her own books. She was a very good writer, by the way. And I looked at her paintings, and the conclusion I came to was that this story is very close to me, because Berta was born the same year as my grandmother, and they were born in the beginning of the 1900s in a rural area in the north of Sweden, and they both had this expectation. It was the culture at the time. You stay in your village, you take over your father's the house, you marry someone in the neighborhood, in the village, and as a woman you take care of the children and the animals and all the household stuff. That was what was expected of her. That was what was expected of my grandmother. Mm-hmm. My grandmother, she she went the conventional way. She did become a housewife. She did what was expected of her. She didn't particularly have artist's dreams, but my mother, when I grew up, my mother always said, and I remember this so clearly during my whole childhood growing up, when we were visiting my grandmother, my mother would say, what would have become of grandmother if she would have been allowed to study?
Yeah.
What would she had done with her life? And growing up with that kind of mantra, it was interesting for me to dive into someone who's born the same year as my grandmother, who didn't do the convention. She didn't go the conventional way. She had the courage to break it. And the courage you need to do that is you have to be so strong, because you might have to break with your family and go against what your parents say and maybe what the whole village say. So I just thought that it was amazing what Berta Hansson, that she had the courage to dream and to follow her dream, even though her road was very crooked, but she did become an artist eventually. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that's a big motivation to write a book or what about
Yes.
your person. Yes.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell me, you said that you like did some research and looked up some books and read her diaries, you said. Yes.
Yeah.
She wrote diaries as well.
Yeah.
But in your book, you decided to focus solely on Berta's childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you come to this decision?
Well, I thought it was interesting to, when I read through her story, the biography and her letters and her diary and all that, there was, when she was very young, like, well, the story takes place, the story I wrote takes place right as she goes from being a girl to becoming a woman, that kind of transition. And that's when her mother died. And that was an enormous, it really was, it shook her up and it changed her life, because the mother believed in her and the mother listened to her. And who knows what would have happened if the mother had continued living. But I wanted to have that as a dramatic turn of events. And I also wanted to tell the story within the time frame of a year, with the seasons changing, and have the seasons changing being the symbol of going from going into adulthood somehow, and then ending the story with keeping it open what she would, I mean, you feel when the story ends that she is on her way, but in reality it took her quite some time to become an artist. It took, I mean, she was almost close to 40 years old when she actually took the step to become an artist. So it was too long a story, so I wanted to focus on this
breaking point, maybe. Yes. This is so interesting, because I wanted to ask you as well, how do you think this story about a girl growing up at the beginning of the last century communicates then with children that live today?
Yes, I that was a challenge, because I wanted the story to feel, I wanted children and grown-ups, whoever read the book, I wanted them to feel like it was about them, or that they could recognize the feeling of do I really fit in here? What do I want to become when I grow up? Is it possible to follow your dreams? Those questions are universal and they're timeless. And I thought of many different things of making this story accurate for today's children and grown-ups. And I think, well, the question is universal, but I also used my own daughter as the model for Berta Hansson. So I used So I took many pictures of my daughter. She was 13 at the time, and like perfect age for the role. And using actual photographs and painting from photographs, but sort of playing around with it. So I put it in the time frame of 1920s. But I think that gave an air of now. I don't know, but yeah, I played around with it.
Yes, because it's a very contemporary book. I mean, it's about a girl growing up at the beginning of the last century, but there are a lot of people that can really identify with her and her struggle and the things she's going through. Yes. I wanted to ask you something, another question about Berta Hansson and the way you work. It's about the way you use the materials and how much truth lies in the book itself, because, you know, it's very interesting in every case when it's we have a book that's based on a biography. The readers always ask, oh, but is this fiction? Is this truth?
What's true?
Yes.
What's true?
And
yes.
what's your attitude towards truth as well as an artist?
Yes, good question. When I'm just going to get the book. I only have the English copy here in my studio. When I decided to make this story, I've been in contact with the relatives of Berta Hansson. She never had any of her children of her own, but she does have, she had siblings and they have children and they are taking care of her paintings and everything. I also wanted to make clear to them and have them accept my approach, which was I want to feel free not having to tell the truth. Because what is the truth? Nobody knows for sure what was going through her mind. I use so, and they were like totally open and fine with me using her story and creating it the way I wanted to create it. But the events in the book, like with the soup that she's making and burning it on the stove, it happened. That's her story. And the mother dying, and her the story with the card of the Michelangelo's painting. So, and also with the doctor that had the paintings, the painting collection in his home.
Yes.
All those things did happen to her, but maybe not in the order that I am telling the story. So, for example, the doctor she met when she was a grown-up and had started teaching in another city. So but I liked that she was standing outside looking in through the window of this doctor that had all these fantastic paintings on the wall. I just liked that image. So I put it into when she was 13, 14. So I felt free to use her truth, the truth, and mix it around and just put everything in this year that is taking place here.
So it's not her story, but it's a story about her.
Yes. And we don't call it a biography because that wouldn't be fair. It's not a biography, but when her relatives read the book when it was finished, they said this is more true. This is the truth. You know, they felt that this was capturing her spirit and her life, even though the chain of events wasn't like they were in reality.
Yes.
So I found that very gratifying that her relatives really, really liked the book and accepted it as something real, you know. That's
great. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you something about the way you worked on the book, because I find it very interesting that you are the author and the illustrator as well, because there are a lot of illustrators that cooperate with some writers. The writers work fully on the writing and the illustrators are doing the paintings, the illustrations. So what was for you of key importance in your experience for achieving the balance between the illustrations in the book and the text? How did you work on the book?
Well, I started with writing the text first, but of course it wasn't finished, but it was the skeleton of the story and an idea of the beginning, the middle and the end. So I did work with the words first, and then I started making sketches of and thinking like how would I what will the story tell in the pictures, and what will the story tell in the words, and so I did a lot of sketching, a lot of discuss. So I did the sketching, and then I had meetings with my publisher, and we went through it, and sometimes we took away something, sometimes we added, you know, so it went back and forth with the sketching. And then when there was a clear plan, I started making the originals, the colored paintings, and the whole process took 2 years. But I do, when it comes to doing both, because I also work with writers. Yes. I do enjoy writing and illustrating, because there is this marriage between word and image that is very exciting, and that really brings out the third thing, you know, like that awakens associations from the reader, that creates, that builds, makes the story even bigger than just the text and the image. So it's like 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5 or a million, you know.
Yes.
So I really find the usage of text and image and how to make the most dramatic feeling to it, and also to use text, image, and silence. How to use silence. Like you use text, image, text, image, text, image, and then you open up and there's completely silent, but there's an image there, but it's no words. And how to use that as to build a drama.
Yes,
it's a lot of fun.
Yes, sure. I mean, your paintings are great, and your illustrations, your writing. I think there are a lot of writers and illustrators that are saying yes, they want to work on such books because of this marriage between the word and picture, and all the associations that are woken up in the reader whilst reading. A very important part of the book is the death of the mother and her illness.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can tell me something about, for example, now in this pandemic times, when children are much more exposed to risks in their everyday lives. Do you believe that it is even more important to talk with children, about death, about these topics, about death and illness?
Well, I think that it's definitely, tuberculosis was a pandemic, an epidemic in Sweden during the early 1900s, and it really killed most families, especially in the north of Sweden, have some family member that died. It affected young people, and the death rate in tuberculosis was very high. And it's interesting with this in Sweden, for example. This is my grandmother's generation when tuberculosis was really killing a lot of people in Sweden, and my generation, so 2 generations later, it was forgotten that we had tuberculosis. Yes. So it's like, what? And nobody talks about it. And then comes this pandemic, and then people are like, oh my God. But it's just interesting how quickly we forget these catastrophic events, like the Spanish flu. Yeah. that also killed so many people in Sweden, and then the tuberculosis. But now there's corona. I think that it can be interesting to read a book like this, and about that there is epidemics, that this is something that happens to the human race, to the world, viruses that come and that can be dangerous, and that we need to talk about, we need to remember, we need to also, I think it's strengthening to it's always this, when you read a book and you recognize yourself, and you recognize, oh, my mother was sick in this, whatever. It's always strengthening with literature in that way, that you can recognize yourself and talk about death, and talk about like death is always present, always, whether we have a pandemic or not, there's always death, but a pandemic it is scary. It's scary with this little invisible bacteria or virus that can be so threatening that it can kill a family member. So yes, I think it's always good to talk about.
So I wanted to ask you at the end, what is your message to children and also to adults now at the, maybe how did you cope with the pandemic, and maybe your message of hope, what would it be?
Well, when it comes to the story, and the story about Berta Hansson, and what I find, what inspired me, and what inspired me with Berta Hansson, and still inspires me, and I keep reminding myself, is to follow, be true to yourself, true to your heart, and follow that. Be courageous to be yourself, even though your family or your community might think that have another idea of what you should do with your life. That is what the story is about, to really be true and listen inward, listen to yourself, and be strong and be courageous. That's what the book is saying. When it comes to events like Corona, I think that I'm so grateful that we live in these modern times, and they have this vaccine that has been developed so quickly, and compared to living when Berta Hansson lived, when the mother died, there was no medicine, there was nothing that saved her. So we have that, we have science, we have this development, but there are many sides to the epidemic, to the pandemic. There are also this side of it's horrible that people are getting sick and people are dying. That's the horrible side. The positive side of the pandemic, if you can call it a positive side, is that you are forced to stop and take a break in your ordinary life, and force yourself to maybe look at the world and look, how are we living our lives? Maybe there's time for change. Maybe this is the moment when we really change things from there's climate catastrophes, there's climate, all that stuff is. So I think for me, this is an opportunity for change. And I really hope that everybody's that the pandemic can propel this change.
Yeah, taking a break for the breakthrough. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful message of hope. I mean, there was a lot of going on in the past few years, and still there's a lot going on. But yes, I think there are a lot of messages of hope that are keeping us going. And yes. Dear Sara, thank you very much for the talk, and thank you for answering all of my questions.
Thank you for your good questions.
Драги гледачи и гледачки, за повеќе информации во врска со проектот Европски приказни на Надеж, како и за повеќе информации во врска со останатите изданија на издавачката куќа Артконект, посетете ја нашата веб страница, Facebook или Instagram, или посетете ја најблиската книжарница. Ви благодарам многу за вниманието. Чао!